everyone. Welcome to another session of the Class Academy webinars brought to you in collaboration with Ethos Empowers. Today's conversation, From Studio to Site, the Realities of Designing with Glass, explores the teaching of glass in architectural education, translating its practical use on site, and how the gap between academic imagination and construction realities can be bridged through dialogue, experimentation, and collaboration. Joining us today are two remarkable voices representing the two ends of the spectrum. We are honored to welcome Dr. Kanika Bansal, an academic leader, researcher, and design thinker with over 22 years of experience in shaping architectural education and professional practice. As a key contributor in the growth of Chitkara School of Architecture and Planning, she has been instrumental in strengthening the industry academia bridge, ensuring that students are equipped with technology driven skills and a strong understanding of real world market demands. Dr. Kanika brings a global perspective to her work. She was awarded the Erasmus Plus International Credit Mobility Grant and visited the Metropolia University of Applied Sciences in Finland under the prestigious Teacher Mobility Program. A prolific academic, she has authored numerous research papers, over 15 of which are indexed in Scopus, completed several consultancy projects, and holds 3 design patents, reflecting her commitment to innovation. Her expertise is recognized across the profession. She has served on technical committees, chaired sessions at national and international conferences, and is a reviewer for leading journals published by Emerald, Taylor and Francis, and Elsevier. She is frequently invited as a jury member at platforms such as IDAC and WAD Asia and contributes actively to heritage and design discourse through her association with INTAC and IIA. Joining her is architect Aditya Mandlik, an architect, researcher, and speculative designer whose work pushes the boundaries between architecture, ecology, and emerging technologies. Based in Mumbai, he leads Studio Aditya Mandlik, a practice known for exploring post anthropocentric futures and advancing experimental, ecological approaches to design. A graduate of the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia in Barcelona, Aditya brings an international perspective to his work. His recent installation, Factory 5.0, was showcased under the Grand Projects category at Dutch Design Week 2025, making him the first Indian architect to present a public installation in the Netherlands, an achievement that positions his practice at the forefront of global design innovation. Beyond practice, Aditya is deeply committed to academia. He has previously taught in Sweden and continues to teach at leading architecture schools in Mumbai, engaging students in critical discussions around materiality, urbanism, and technological futures. His teaching and research reflect a strong belief in design as a tool to rethink human environment relationships in the rapidly changing world. His forward looking approach and commitment to the ecological innovation makes him an inspiring voice in today's conversation on the future of architecture. And together, they will unpack how glass is taught, tested, and transformed, and what it takes to bring conceptual ideas to life without losing design integrity. Welcome, Dr. Kanika and architect Aditya. It is a pleasure to have you both with us.
Thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me here and giving me this platform to discuss about the modalities and the nuances of glass. And thanks to Ethos and Geeta for having me here and choosing me to discuss how this particular material really is revolutionary, but needs a very, very careful process when it is thought of being installed and being a part of the design process. So thank you for your kind words as well, and over to you, Rebecca.
My first question is to Dr. Kanika. Ma'am, as an educator leading design studios, how do you approach the challenge of getting students to think of glass not just as a transparent element, but as a performative material that behaves differently in real world conditions?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question, and especially as an educator, when you really look at the approach and the challenge of getting the students to think glass not just as a transparent element. So, the whole idea is that with glass, understanding it as a living material and not as a static or a merely transparent material, but as a material which interacts with light, heat, reflection, sound, and structure. So we really have to understand that glass is not a static material, it is responsive. It has a lot of responsibility when it is actually installed in any design. It basically is a mediator between the interior and the exterior. It, gives you the sense of openness, and the absence of glass generally leaves you with a closed or an enclosed sense of feeling. It also determines the amount of visibility or the amount of privacy an enclosure or an opening or a building would offer. So, as an educator, my role is to have this transition visible to the students and have a broader perspective of looking at glass rather than just having glass as a material which is to be installed anywhere and at any time. So the whole idea is to tell them what glass is and also help them discover what glass can do in the studios. So there are, of course, a lot of ways we are incorporating glass in our design studios. But by the end of every design studio, the whole objective of a design educator is that glass is not only treated as an aesthetic afterthought. It has to be chosen and fitted into the context after a series of informed choices, which are shaped either by climate or by user comfort or by structure, sustainability, and technology.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. That was very true what you said. My next question is to architect Aditya. So, your studio's work is known for its refined use of light and material honesty. When you begin a project, how do you approach glass not just as an aesthetic choice, but as a design challenge that demands precision and collaboration?
I mean, honestly, first I should start by saying I really am glad that y'all thought of me, and we can do this. And it's I mean, thank you so much for having me here. To begin with, I have so many questions for Kanika ji as well after her response. So maybe after this conversation we can have this dialogue. But I mean, to be honest, I glass itself as a material is very, I mean, it has a certain properties, right? And it is a very fascinating material because to some extent, a civilization is what defined a glass as a material. So, I mean, but the evolution of the material itself from something that's so delicate to something what we have today has been a constant sort of effort, and it somehow aligns to the trajectory to human sort of expertise in sort of being how I mean perceivedly advanced that we think of ourselves to be. So I think and glass is one of those materials, that I feel like you touch every time. Yeah. But at the same time, if you have fingerprints on it, you'll feel a little, oh shit, So I would not take away from the fact that it is extremely aesthetic. It is something extremely visual. So when I think of it, I mean, in the practice itself, right? I don't know if I use it only for the aesthetic purposes or not, but for me, I think I use it as a medium to sort of, in at times, expand a space or compress a space, right? I use it to some extent, sort of define thresholds. I like when something is blurry, right? But I also like when there's a hint of something at the back that's happening as a performance. So you're giving sort of a blurry outline to, say, the day to day, right? And I think you can do that with glass. I think that is the beauty of the material itself. There's definitely an intensity with which, say, the thickness and the molecularity of, say, the kind of glass that you use changes, say, the perception around what the space could be. And I think you would use different kind of glass differently, right? I mean, so many times I've worked with like really tiny spaces, and I've used mirrors to like expand the space, but I've also used it as a method. Like I mean, sometimes it can be so scary because I have like these memories where I've just walked into the glass because it's been like extremely clear and speckless, right? And I've hit myself. And it was, I mean, I remember it because it isn't something, it was funny at the end of the day, right? But I think that you can really use it as a tool to sort of curate differences or slight transitions between spaces. You can curate it in a way where the transition itself is not very solid, but it's blurry enough for a person to understand how to navigate. So I think in some sense I use glass in this exact same fashion, right? So yeah, and it's all about light with glass for me. So I mean, the intensity with which I can sort of use, like the intensity with which I can curate light within a space is also a definition, are also the times when I use glass very specifically. So I think that would be how I would possibly think about the material itself. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts and experiences. My next question is to Dr. Kanika. Ma'am, students often propose bold glass forms and facades in design studios without fully grasping their technical realities. How would you help them balance creative freedom with constructability and climatic performance?
Oh, honestly, it is a very difficult question as an educator because architecture, I would say, cannot be learned in a closed environment. And especially exploring any material, be it glass, brick, concrete, anything that you talk about. So, in a undergraduate course, which is 5 years, as educators, we only expose our students to the various nuances and the characteristic properties that any particular material has. And this is in continuation to what Aditya just mentioned about. He understands the properties of glass, and then probably he would use glass to expand a space or to shrink it, or maybe, to connect or disconnect, and so on and so forth. Now, when you really look at it from the perspective of a student, um, they very well know that it is the only place where they can have their imaginations flow over and above the realities of the world. Sometimes as educators, we only go and tell our students ki it's an academic exercise. Do not bind your creativity and your imagination, and let it go beyond what you've ever imagined can be built. And with the coming up of the technologies, we also see beyond imagination built on ground in real. Now, when we really look at bold glass forms and facades, we do not want to dissuade students from using glass. We do not persuade them either for using glass as a material. The only thing as educators, the responsibility on us is to educate them enough as to where to use them and how to use them and why to use glass as a material. Now, what is most important is to bring to light to students about the material and the context in which it has to be embedded. So, any place, for example, we sit in Chandigarh, we are closer to Chandigarh, and taking them to Capitol Complex is an integral part of our academic curriculum. Not only once, but we try to take them at least once, twice, or thrice to the Capitol Complex to imbibe the learnings of Corbusier. Now, if our audience who's listening here, and if Aditya has been to Capitol Complex and probably Rebecca, you would see it has a very bold statement. All buildings within the Capitol Complex have a very, very defined vocabulary laid down by Corbusier and a very bold and impressive form and a very bold statement, I would say. But none of them really give up glass as that material which gives the statement. The statement there is dictated by concrete. Now, when you look at concrete as a material, it has its own characteristics, it has its own properties, it has its own visual mass property, which you will take up from a building like a Capitol Complex, the High Court, or the Secretariat, or the Assembly building. And that is what probably demonstrates power over there. On the contrary, if you really look at the La Havre, where you have that pyramid just opposite to the main historic building over there, where glass has been very, very religiously used in a very bold pyramidical form, it suits its context there. So, using concrete or using glass or using brick is not the question, or probably having glass as a material to use bold forms is also not the question. The question is what you are designing, where you are designing it for, and how do you really fit it into the context for where you are designing. And also the essentiality of any material per se, whether it is glass or any other material, is the practical foundation that it is built on. You can dream about anything. You can probably have a glass house or something called like a Villa Savoy only in glass, maybe on the moon or Mars or wherever, but does it really function there? Will it actually work over there? That is, I think, what needs to be exposed to our students. So I think the characteristic properties of any material as to how it responds, where it began from, how has it evolved, what are the different varieties that are available, why each of the variety is different from the other, what are the properties of each variety, and how does it respond in a particular context suiting to the particular need of the client is what is very, very important. So we promote them, of course, to use bold forms, we promote them to use facades, but we also sensitize them to use glass as a material, which of course has an aesthetic quality, I'm sure all of us agree, but has a lot of heat emittance, reflection, and a lot of, problems, I would say, or challenges, I would say, associated to its use. So, catering to those challenges and fitting it into the context is what needs to be taught in the studio, because you can't evade glass. You can't evade glass. As the sustainability enthusiasts would say, कि glass use नहीं करना चाहिए. But that's not the point. ग्लास यूज करना चाहिए, पर कैसे करना चाहिए और कहाँ करना चाहिए, that is the question I think we teach the students about.
Yes, ma'am, true. I agree with you. The context, the functionality, and understanding the properties is very important when it comes to using any material, especially glass. And Aditya, sir, my next question is for you. So,
Yeah.
when a design moves from a drawing to the site, where do you see most detailing decisions around glass evolve? So, and what drives those changes, whether it is material behavior or fabrication or on-site improvisation?
I'm smiling when you're asking me this question because my first response to it is what drives it? It's chaos. Yeah, it's chaos because there's so many. I mean, there've been so many times when um, you detail the drawings out to the T, right, to the last nut, and something that's happening on site is completely different. Completely different in the sense like. Um, I mean, the ability to read the drawings is not something that directly always translates to the last person on the site, right? And I think the challenge itself is the ability to communicate, right? I mean, it is a delicate material, and I've had instances where um, we've we've made a certain sort of outline to be subtracted from a bigger piece of glass, and the outline was a mirror image of what it was supposed to be, and it just, I mean, um, and sadly you could do nothing about it because you had to get the other piece because it just wouldn't fit right. And I mean, see, I think somewhere the challenges definitely are, say, bigger the size of the piece of glass it is, heavier it'll be, delicate to handle on site. Uh, there'll need to be more precision. But I think somewhere I think it needs to be mediated, and it's not necessarily just glass. Like there are so many forms of ceramics, right, which are delicate and which need to, I mean, which need to be handled with a lot of care. And in some sense you just have to sort of navigate through the chaos, and honestly it has its own beauty. I might be romanticizing the chaos because when I'm a part of it, I don't, I mean, I'm just like I'm all over the place where I'm just like, oh, this should have happened this way and this should have happened the other way. But I think only in retrospection, I think sometimes there are very interesting outcomes out of the chaos. And it's nice to sort of navigate through it on site as well. So even if I plan to the extreme detail as a studio when we're executing the project, there could be times when things just don't fall in place. And I think it's perfect because when it doesn't fall in place, I think there's a little room to sort of adapt and alter on site. And I think it's fun, you know. And I also think it's part of the process um, where you're constantly sort of challenged by what next. And I think it's such a I mean, that I think that is why I like architecture to some extent, right? Like it's just constantly you've got to like innovate when you're in the studio or when you're on site. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's just fun. I also think I totally agree to what Kanika ji was saying. You know, I think it when you're talking about glass, you're talking about it on a scale which is material, which is molecular, um, which is not actually a building, right? So, and no building, I mean, building is a kit of sort of parts, right? It's a kit of like different materials, and no singular material can sort of or should, right? Like even if it does, I mean, it shouldn't sort of define what architecture is. But architecture should technically be a collaboration between all the materials that sort of like flow through each other's intelligence, right? Like if I were just to put it, brick has its own intelligence. A certain type of brick will have its own intelligence, and I also find a few, like I was out of a camp when I graduated, or as a young rebellious architect. I'm still young, bitches, by the way. But as a young rebellious architect, I think I was of an opinion that we shouldn't have glass buildings, right? But only now, when I'm sort of reflect back, I think maybe there's a lot more refinement that needs to be in within that one statement, right? So it need not just be a glass building, but it I mean, you can't take away from the intelligence that glass already provides you with, right? So then as Kanika ji also said, that there's a way to sort of organize the intelligence of a material around a building and wrap uh, make say that form itself. And in some sense, this is what architecture is, right? Like architecture, I don't in some sense think that it is not about a building. It's about the thought process to approaching the building itself, right? It's the way you sort of approach a design, or what do you intend on achieving through this. So for me, if like I would be fascinated by how Sabine uses glass for her products, right? Or someone else uses it in a certain way, and it doesn't really matter what scale it is as an intervention, but it is that, I mean, it's that what sort of emotions that you can sort of curate out of a certain materiality, right? And yeah, I think that is what internal chaos looks like. But yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your anecdotes as well, your experiences. Dr. Kanika, my next question is for you. From your experience in mentoring students, what is one common misconception that you notice happens when they attempt to design with glass, and how do you address it in the studio?
Okay, there is not one, there are two misconceptions. Um, First is the students think that brick is boring, it is obsolete, and whatever we want to make to look modern, we must use glass. So for them, glass and its use is synonymous to modernism. Bade glass facades, you'll have the stairwell, even a simple house, a 10 marla house, if we give them to design, they will have huge, glass facades. Ma'am, it gives a very nice and a modern facade, to the house. So, I mean, for them, using brick or, using plaster or probably any cladding material is replaced by glass, but they do not really understand what glass brings in a residential project or per se in any project. So we really have to make them understand that yes, glass came up as a revolution after the Industrial Revolution, but it is really not only the revolution in material. You have to look at it through the lens of the user who's residing in it or who's using that building. How often would this huge piece of glass need maintenance and cleanliness, leave alone glare, heat, etc.? Even if you look at the perspective of safety and maintenance by use of huge glass pieces on the front facades of the buildings, I mean, that is one perspective which really tells them कि इतने बड़े बड़े ग्लास लगाने तो बहुत easy हैं. I mean, to think and perceive. But जब site पे उनकी installation होगी, who will manage that installation? How will that installation really get done? And this brings me to what Aditya just mentioned as his own story, कि whatever he proposed and whatever really happened on the site, they were not in sync. So, I mean, of course, there needs a degree of maturity to reach that stage. Students of, second year or third year aspire to be young, dynamic architects, bringing revolutionary designs on ground and bringing forth something which has never been done. And they think that glass is that revolutionary modern material where you could replace any material and just put in probably a reflective glass or a toughened glass or whatever. Safety is no problem, ma'am. We have a bulletproof glass. You can't use a bulletproof glass in a house, maybe for the stairwell facade. So they would understand it, they would read it, but they would not really comprehend its use in the real time. So what we really address in the studios is to, as I said, we don't dissuade them from using glass, but we tell them how to use it religiously or more meticulously, understanding probably the orientations, probably the way light has to penetrate, probably if light is penetrating inside, is it glare free or is it full of glare, or probably if it's a cold climatic zone, probably the glass has to permit heat inside yet have the cold winds cut off from the inside. So the sensitization of the property of any material is most important. And as a educator for more than 2 decades, I have realized that it takes time for the students to really understand the practicality associated with anything, not only a material, but even if it's a small solution of a kiosk, they would fancy it but not understand it realistically when you really go on the site and have it built over there. So probably looking at a kiosk which is only a cylindrical kiosk and a pure glass cylindrical kiosk, how will it function? How does it really work? Does it really fulfill the function of for what it is? For example, let's say we have a security check post. So one of my students said a security check post has to have a vigilance throughout the day. I mean, I'm just talking of how students perceive it, and what better to have 100% transparency, so that at no time of the day do you miss anybody who's going inside. So he designed a security check post totally in glass. Now, you have to also understand that security, of course, is one aspect. Vigilance, of course, is the next aspect. But what about the person who's sitting in a glass and clay enclosed, I would say a kiln kind of a thing, where you are exposed to excessive heat or you're exposed to excessive cold? That is what they will not think. So it generally builds in class, it generally takes time, and the ideas mature as the students mature. The whole idea is that we tell them to think of glass as a very active material, to think of glass as a very responsive material, and use it religiously so that it stays there, it acts as a boon, and does not become a trouble for the user later on, whether the user is inside the building or whether it is passing by the building, which is what I generally narrate the incident of the LIC building designed by master architects in Delhi. The glare and the reflection that it leaves on the public space adjoining the LIC building has been in controversy ever since the building was made. So you have to look at the good side of using a material, you have to look at the con side of using the same material, and then kind of understand it. But that understanding at the level of an undergrad, of course, remains very limited. As educators, it is our responsibility to tell them and sensitize them to how to look at a material and how to really perceive and propose anything in any design solution. So from beginning from a very, very small kiosk to solutions that range up to urban design level, glass is not the only solution which gives you a modern look. Of course, it can be intelligently used and blended with all other materials. You can't evade it, but you can, of course, use it more religiously and sensitively for your design solutions to be more effective, to be more climatically responsive, and to be more sustainable in their own sense.
Yes, ma'am, very true. Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Aditya, you had mentioned about how important communication and collaboration is, and I'm sure you have collaborated often closely with craftsmen and fabricators. And so, what do these collaborations teach you about the gap between the architectural imagination and site execution, especially with working with something as like glass?
I think collaborations are, without collaborations, nothing really happens. So I think that they're in some sense foundational aspect to a practice, right? I think again, just the way you're talking about, say, a material having an intelligence, collaborations are also about intelligence, right? And I think the differences in the way, say, the intelligence sort of appropriates itself is what a great collaboration sort of feels like, right? So, I mean, like to be very honest, I think there are times when craftsmen have a knowledge bank towards really handling a material, which might not be something that someone in the studio will have when they are sort of designing that same exact piece, right, or that same exact element. Um, I don't have like a very specific direction where it's only glass specific, right? Collaboration only that's glass specific. But I think generally, like, I mean, the whole idea of collaboration is to sort of work with an alternative form of intelligence, right? And I mean, um, this factory 5.0 that you're mentioning is was also a collaboration, but the nature of collaboration was completely different. And I might be deviating from the question, but there the collaboration was with 10,000 worms, and I was working with them for their intelligence. And I think um, they were also within a, a completely transparent sort of casing, which was adapted and crafted only for specifically for micro habitats to be formed, right? So I think in some sense, what I'm trying to say is that I think collaboration is just about how one perceives it. Like there's an artist who works with glass differently when he's doing ceramics itself to when he's playing with glass, and the transition between the two, even if say to some extent it's about the same origin sort of material groups, right? It is very interesting how different outcomes can come through. So there have been times when I've tried to sort of work and understand someone else's approach on a material and how they perceive it, and then sort of reposition it through their lens, no, in the bigger process and the picture. I think that is what it is. And I think, I mean, to some extent, taking away from say what Kanika ji was also saying, right? I think sometimes it is very easy to sort of hint at modernity and associate it with a material, right? Because possibly that is what it has been in the past. Like, for example, when you go through these cathedrals, there are these huge glass panes, but that was also technological advancement for that period, right? And nothing before that allowed for light to be uh, played with within a space. So, but at the same time, I think it's extremely important, no, to get your hands dirty. Like, there are so many times possibly the contractor doesn't know how to deal with it, but the last person who's putting the labor knows it, right? Because he knows how to craft it. And sometimes it's better to learn from him to be able to come up with a better outcome, right? It's easy to imagine something, but it's sort of, it has its journey from imagination to sort of execution. So you could be extremely adamant that this is what you want, and to some extent that is also important, but you also need to play and curate it with the collaborators that are actually holding that thing, right? And I think it's, um, I mean, yeah, I think that is what collaboration is, to a lot of extent, where you need to sort of exchange knowledge banks. You need to exchange how we all deal with, like, say, like different we have different point of views to look at it, and I think those sort of overlap and merge. So yeah, that is what I
Yes,
think.
sir. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Coming again back to Dr. Kanika, ma'am, looking at today's fast evolving building technologies, how do you think academia can stay updated with industry innovations without losing its focus on fundamentals and critical thinking?
Oh, this is a very difficult question because here in the School of Architecture, we train them for fundamentals in critical thinking primarily. Now, the biggest challenge that we as educators face is that the building technologies are evolving even faster than we teach. So, we have our own bindings, we have our own limitations, we get raw canvases. Though, with technology, the students that come here now are more informed, but they do not have the cognitive ability to have informed decision making, even if they are more informed, because they are more driven by technology. We tell them to curate a design, they would go on chat gpt, get the brief ready in 5 minutes, and maybe another ai tool, and the plan is also ready for them. But using that cognitive ability, the fundamentals, and applying that critical thinking process to developing that solution is our primary challenge now with the coming of AI. So, leave alone industry, leave alone innovations, we are only telling them to go slow, to adapt, to understand, and then respond, and not produce any design proposal in a click of a minute, because that is too robotic, that is too mechanical, that does not really respond to the human needs maybe. But yes, of course, then they would pitch in up D5 renders. Then they would pitch up some immersive technologies and have that VR set. मैम देखो तो सही अंदर से दिख कैसा रहा है. अरे भाई, please understand the practicality of it. Please understand the usability. Please understand the aspiration of the client. Please understand the fundamentals of design and the fundamentals of building construction. Ultimately, the collaboration between design and construction is what makes any building come alive. Unless you really have that collaboration seamlessly flowing on the site, everything would either remain on the paper, or anything which would be executed on site would be something else. We really go to Instagram and see a lot of you know sketches showing that this is what the architect perceive and this is what finally it comes. So, and it really happens so, and sometimes you are bound, फिर तुम्हें भी लगता है कि ठीक है यार, सोचा तो था, I thought this, but then ultimately when the contractor says that this cannot be executed, howsoever good material you are using, howsoever updated technology you are using, if it is not executed well on site, it does not give what you really have perceived and imagined on the site. So the whole idea of embedding fundamentals and the ability to critically think, and then topping it up with the fast evolving technologies, has to be embedded in the students, so that they, when they really go to the industry as interns or as fresh graduates, they of course, it is always said that whatever you are learning in 5 years of architecture, you have to unlearn and then relearn. I hope Aditya would agree to what I'm trying to say. But yes, these 5 years are very, very important in shaping up the fundamentals, in uh, you know uh, probably shaping up their vision to see something differently, to critically analyze everything and anything that they see, that they visit, that they do, and then adapt it and have technology embedded on it thereafter. So, uh, you know, though as a school of architecture, we are embedding technologies, we are embedding artificial intelligence into our academic curriculum. We have already introduced electives, we have already introduced subjects where we are training students for artificial intelligence, for Revit, for BIM, for D5 renders, and for many more softwares which keep coming every day. And not only the students, of course, we have to follow the TTT model where we also have to train the trainers. Unless the trainers are trained, the students will never be trained. So the challenge on us is twofold. We have to train the trainers also, and we have to train the next generation also. So I think innovation, I think technology, fundamentals, and the ability to critically think and analyze have to really go hand in hand, have to be intelligently seen, have to be intelligently, seamlessly integrated for solutions which really come out on the ground. We cannot have, uh, you know, chat GPT solutions or Gemini solutions being proposed to the client, and the client gets, so by the end of every discussion, the students generally say ki ma'am, but then the draftsman or any person who's not even trained in architecture, the client will himself go on chat gpt, type the prompt and get a solution which is ready made. The client does not have that technical ability to understand it and critically think and optimize it. And that's what is our profession all about. That is what architecture is all about. So howsoever updated we are, we cannot replace human intelligence, because that is where critical thinking ability is, which is what so far I hope artificial intelligence does not have. It's a mechanical thing. It gives robotical solutions, and applying those robotic solutions with a critical thinking mind would only make it more humane. That's my say on that.
Yes, ma'am, very true about the importance of fundamentals and critical thinking and the human touch and thinking. Uh, Mr. Aditya, my next question is to you again. So, translating a drawing detail into something buildable is often where design intent is truly tested. So, how do you guide your team through that translation from line work on paper to precision on site, especially when working with glass?
I mean, I think it's, I mean, nothing actually changes in the answer, to be very honest. I think it is that chaos. I mean, it is, and I mean, I'm using chaos as a term for the amount of sort of negotiations or conversations that revolve around it, right? There's definitely a design intent when it's drawn on paper. Um, yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to like say that when it's generated on ChatGPT, it's still I think it's still a form of collaboration, right? Every intelligence sort of has its limitations, but similarly, when you're sort of doing something just on paper, to sort of it translating in any form of physical dimension, there's a lot of not just logistical, but just the dynamics of the material, right? So it is. sometimes it is extremely important to know what you're doing on a smaller scale. So what we also usually do is that we'll make like parts of, say, a facade or something, we'll try to make a 1:5 model, and while making 1:5 or 1:10, just that one small detail, right? It sort of also puts so many things in perspective, right? From so and it's extremely important for me as a studio to sort of make things like with your hand, right? It and not taking away from the fact that I would love to generate, say, my plans and love to generate this. But I think it I think as a role for me, it's more to do with the curation of these aspects, right? Like, say, if mm, what I really like about, say, today versus, say, 10 years back, when yeah, when I was a student, or maybe even before that, like, I'm just thinking when I was. But what is nice is that you can sort of make so many options around it, right? Like something like, say, DeFi render or any render engine, sort of, if you're working with that precision, um, you can truly imagine what or be a part of the space that you're trying to conceive. And there is so much sort of ability to have informed decisions before it goes on site, right? Because the minute it goes on site, there's a lot more dimensions involved. So it's easier to sort of like tweak, say, 200 options out on paper. But I think it is extremely important to do those 200 in the first place. If you don't do those 200s, you possibly don't know how your last five will work out. And so yeah, I think it's rigorous. It's important to handle what you're going to use. And yeah, I mean, and then um, the chaos is the navigation of like communicating with different sort of agency that are part of the execution process, right? And yeah, I think that is how, yeah, I think that is how the process more or less goes about, no?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts. Um, Dr. Kanika, my next question is to you. When you think of from studio to site, is there any one personal moment that best captures that transition for you when an idea or a drawing took shape in reality and it changed the way you looked at glass?
Um, well, yes, since, as I said, all exercises that we do here are perceived as academic exercises with the notion that nothing is going to be ever built, but generally it is not so. I got a consultancy project once. I'm just going to take 2 minutes because this is what really changed my perspective also. So it was a residential house project, and I was supposed to do the interior layout only. And the client was highly spiritual, and capturing the essence of the spirituality of the client was very possessive about this little cabin mandir, which the client wanted because of the lady being a widow, and because she says the rest of my life, my children are overgrown, etc., etc. And now I want to have most of my time spent, chanting and so on and so forth. So that I think a 6 feet by 8 feet module, which she termed would be a mandir, was very special to her. So she says ki baki everything is all right, but I want the mandir to be designed really, really, really well. And this I'm talking of is, I think, about 1.5 decade ago. I think it's in 2012-13, this story that I'm narrating, which is where I started looking at glass differently. So I thought, what better than using glass for this little enclosure, because you cannot capture the vibes and the energies of the deities inside the mandir into a four-walled enclosure and have that energies through that transparent material flowing out. And even if she's chanting, even if she's not inside the actual space, she's still within that space with that idea. So I kind of proposed a 6 feet high and a 6 feet wide four-walled thing with one side absolutely open, so that. And this is what I also gave my students as a time problem to understand how more solutions can come out. But then we finally thought that putting glass on all the three sides, in fact, two sides, and the third side will have a curtain to restrict the movement and access into it. And but believe you me, that 6 feet by 6 feet glass, when it was actually designed, the kind of the swastik that we made, etc., all the designs that we proposed on it, the etchings, etc., the color, once that piece was ready, everything looked really fancy. But the biggest challenge was the installation. My client stayed on the second floor. Now, bringing that heavy 6 feet by 6 feet glass panel, which were two in number on both the sides, and having it on the second floor, that is the time I thought, shit, what have I done? What have I proposed? How would that narrow staircase have that huge and of course massive and highly weighing piece of glass? And it is obviously fragile, it has to be handled with a lot of care, be transported. So sometimes what you fancy and what really is, and then the next, when it really goes on there, it has to be built, it has to be stable, it has to stand there, take its own load. So all those things you never realize unless it is a real time challenge when you go on the site. So there were two of my students who were with me. I took them there. Then they made a presentation out of it, that these were the challenges that happened on the site, which probably would tell the next generation of students that anything that you propose has to be seen realistically and not only aesthetically and fancifully. So from studio to site, in terms of what Aditya also says, it's a process. It's a process which has to be predefined, which has to be pre-understood, and not be a solution when a problem of course occurs on a site. So that's how you change your perceptions, that's how you change your perspectives, and that's how you start to looking at anything with more practicality. And that really changed my perspective कि सिर्फ ग्लास लगाने से कुछ नहीं होता, प्रपोज करने से कुछ नहीं होता, तुम्हें ये भी देखना पड़ता है. You really have to see how when it comes back on the site, how does it really perform. So probably from that time onwards, whenever I thought of using this size of glass or probably proposing something in glass, I always had some case studies, some interviews done for the glass manufacturers also, for the glass transporters also. What issues and challenges would it bring to us on the site, and then take it over to site and propose it in action.
Yes, ma'am, this is a very interesting story that you've shared. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of learnings too. Mr. Aditya, I'm coming back to you with a question. If you could reimagine the way glass is taught or understood in architecture, what would that new model look like?
I think the best way to sort of understand any material, right, and specifically glass, is so for the longest time, I mean, still, like even now for that matter, I don't think I have dealt with glass as a material where I'm making it, right? And because it is a highly skilled sort of act to sort of blow glass into something or like make sheets. So it requires a lot of skill, it requires a lot of precision, it requires a lot of handling care, right? And it's hot, so it's scary. But I think the only way to innovate, right, is to sort of break the understanding of a material for what it is traditionally used, um, and try to sort of reposition a material in a way where it can be like it's put in a different context, right? It's put in a different sort of setting, and it can be reimagined in a different way. So I think the only way to do it is, I think even for the universities in some sense, is to actually provide with assistance towards say the making of the material, right? And just that process, looking at that process, is in fact a lot more enriching in the way you perceive or use the material after. So in some sense, I think both observing, knowing how something is made, making it yourself changes pretty much your understanding of how you think about that material and in what context. Maybe for all you know, you could design a shoe out of glass, and maybe it could just work. Even right now, if we think that it's slippery or something, I don't know. Or maybe you'll hit it and it'll crack and it'll hurt you. But like, there could be a different way to look at it, right? So yeah, I think just get your hands dirty every time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, we have a final question of the webinar today, and I would like both Dr. Kanika as well as Mr. Aditya to answer this. Maybe Dr. Kanika, you can go first. What is one habit or practice that you believe every young architect should cultivate early on to truly understand glass performance beyond drawings and visualizations?
See, for undergrads, it is very difficult, especially in the foundational years, because they're in the making. They're only trying to comprehend where they've ended up. Because generally, you fancy architecture as something else, but when you really end up taking architecture, it is a lot more than what you had really fancied. So the first 2 years generally go in digesting where you have ended up and the submission load and etc. etc. However, when we really look at glass performance, it is very important, which is why we have a lot of visits, we have a lot of industry experts walking in, we have a lot of seminars and talks with the students. We have to go beyond the drawing board. We have to really observe how it behaves in the real world. So, taking students to on site visits, having interaction with the experts on the site there itself would make them aware of. I mean, we try to. Of course, as I said, 5 years is too less a time. That is the foundational years. In those years, the students are only learning the fundamentals. It takes another 5 years at least, and maybe yet another 5 years to really have that realistic and the practical approach towards using any material per se, not only glass. And of course, when you talk about its performance, I think even after more than 2.5 decades of being into the profession, I would still say I'm learning how glass performs. So I think, in a studio or in a design, class, it is very important for the educators to tell the students to not have hypothetical perceptions in place, to, of course, have some practicalities associated, to have some hands-on experience. If you think, you want to propose a good glass junction or a facade, just try to model it, have some simulations over it. There are 3D modeling tools. There are so many materials which are replicating glass nowadays. You have BIM, you have Revit, which give you an absolute real-time solution which gives you testings also and the solution to those testings also. Of course, you can't do it in the first, second, third year. This is where fourth year and onwards we tell them ki jo bhi whatever you produce, we are training our students to do BIM, we are training our students to use Revit modeling, and Revit has inherited and inbuilt systems where you could understand how glass would perform. So please use them, try to understand that, put your Revit model, simulate it, give some performance simulations, and identify, and then design, redesign, review, and revisit your design. That is how we generally would promote them. But then they realize this only after, when they go in the internships where they really work on in offices with architects who are doing real-time projects where their fancies go for a toss, because the architect would say कि ठीक है, बहुत अच्छा सोचा, बनेगा कैसे, how will it function, मुझे तो it has to be built on site, this is what the client wants, so what you are saying is a very fanciful thing, but ये बनेगा कैसे. So when they come back in their thesis, they are more realistic, they are more practical, and then they tell us कि मैम ये ऐसे बनेगा, I will, probably design this, and this is how it is going to be built. So that shift can only be done once the students are really exposed to the real-time world. I mean, a drawing board is a very good place to put your thoughts on paper. But I think the transition of that thought from paper to site is the real journey of that architect, of any architect, I would say. And I hope Aditya would agree to what I'm saying here.
No, I do. I think, I mean, I wouldn't change anything what you've said, right? But I think there's one aspect where, I mean, even when I take a design studio myself, and what is important is that proposing something is okay. Anyone can, right? And everyone can. And that is why you can also have clients chat GPTing something and proposing something back to you. It's possible. I don't think proposing is a problem. I think imagine it is important to sort of think systemically, right? Think in terms of, say, how execution happens, think in terms of how logistically how things will happen on site, think on so many levels. So I would actually be like, as a student, I would want to say that go crazy with what you propose. Absolutely. Right? Go do the weirdest shapes, do the weirdest things, only if they make sense. And maybe someone else cannot make sense of it, but you as a person, if you can make sense of something, communicate it, right? And I think to so much, like it's the ability of an architect to sort of approach a problem in a different way. Not always the client knows what he wants. They have an understanding of what they want, but not exactly. But if you can propose something that sort of changes the threshold of their expectance, right? Then you're sort of adding more value, right? But not just proposing, but also thinking the back end of how things will happen. And as a student, when you're doing it, just think of why you're doing what you're doing every time. And even, like, say, with my students, right, they know that they can sort of, I mean, use all the loopholes in the educational system to sort of aid their process. And I'm completely fine with it, because I think if they don't find those loopholes in the system, then it's a problem, right? They should be creative enough to find those loopholes, try to do the minimal amount of work in a way to, but not taking away from what they want to achieve, right? So it's extremely important that, okay, this is what I want to achieve, and this is how I'm going to get it. So this is how, if I'm going to get it, I'm going to provide solutions in every aspect to make sure that this happens. And that's it. I mean, it is not usually a challenge to just draw. We all do. I mean, it's lovely. It's the first step towards communication from your brain to your to something, putting it out in the world. But then it becomes real, and then it's more fun, and then is when it's collaboration. Then it's where uh, everything sort of comes down, right? So yeah, why you do what you do is more important than anything. So if and how you do it is where you make it real. So yeah.
Yes, so thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure your advice and insights are going to help a lot of students and young designers who are going to be watching this webinar. And thank you so much again, Dr. Kanika Bansal and architect Aditya Mandlik, for sharing your time, experiences, and insights with us today. This session has beautifully unpacked the journey from studio to site, showing how the understanding of glass evolves from an academic idea to a built reality. We've explored how imagination meets precision, how every design decision is tested on the ground, and how the process of working with glass teaches patience, discipline, and clarity. To everyone who joined us, thank you for being a part of this conversation. We hope it encourages you to look at glass not just as an aesthetic choice, but as an active element that responds to climate, context, and craft. We look forward to seeing you in the next Glass Academy webinar. Thank you.